handed down a death sentence for one of the widows of the late ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. It's almost 10 years since ISIS began its campaign of genocide against the Yazidi minority. The woman, who's been identified as Asma Mohammed, was convicted of complicity in the kidnapping of Yazidi women and girls who were later sold as sex slaves to the ISIS terrorists. Well, joining us now, Entifad Kambar is the president and founder of the Kurdish Protection Action Committee, and he's a former spokesman for the Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq. Good to see you, Entifad. And let's talk about this woman then. She was convicted of keeping Yazidi women in her home and generally contributing to the atrocities that was perpetrated against this very vulnerable minority.
I mean, she was facilitating like a conveyor belt for sex slavery for her husband, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. And as they call them, sabaya. And the sabaya, honestly, in Arabic, it doesn't only mean sex slave. It means the devastated, the impoverished. So they consider the Yazidis, who are kuffar, mean non-believers, as sex slaves. And she was facilitating sex sessions for her husband in a heinous way. That shows us how ugly is political Islam is, because they can use texts from Islam and from the books of Islam, like the Quran, Hadith, to enslave others and to kill others. And that's how it shows us a common understanding how heinous is political Islam, as we see what Hamas has done as well when they raped Israeli women and hostages and killed babies. So as ISIS in Iraq. Honestly, I don't call it anymore political Islam. I call it as the Islamic Nazism, the new Islamic Nazism, which is spreading in Europe and all over the world, unfortunately, without much attention of the West and the United States.
Yeah, it's truly shocking to hear what that woman is accused of. But does this conviction, do you think, represent a small step towards justice for the survivors of the ISIS attacks a decade ago now?
Well, unfortunately, justice has not been served yet in Iraq. The killers of 1,400 recruits in Spiker who were killed in cold blood, videotaped, has not all of them been captured because of the political mayhem in Iraq, because of the Iranian intervention, because of the political targeting. But would I say this woman deserved the death penalty? Absolutely, she deserves it. And she deserves it well after what she's done to other Yazidi women. I met some of these Yazidi sex slaves, as you want to call them, or sabaya. I met them in person, and they were telling me horrifying stories. They were like 12 years old, 11 years old, 13 years old, and they were not only having sex with Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, but when he finishes his business with them, his sex business with them, he will sell them out in a market in the middle of Mosul, in a like auction market to others, and they go from hand to hand to 6, 7, 8, 10 people use them as sex slaves. It's really unimaginable something like this happen in our times. And when some people talk about human rights and what Hamas have, for example, have done in October 7th, it's the most heinous thing, and it's unbelievable. Some people still think Hamas is right, or still think ISIS is right of what they're doing.
Well, the ISIS so-called caliphate attracted people from all over the world, didn't it? Some came from Europe, but Iraqi people also suffered. Not just the Yazidis, but Iraqis from across the board suffered under the tyranny of ISIS. So why did the government in Baghdad call on the UN to wrap up its investigation? Why doesn't it want a definitive, process, investigation into what happened?
I mean, there is complicated, for you to mention about the recruiting. All these terror organizations, especially Islamic terror organizations, they target vulnerable people. They target ex-criminals. Many of the ISIS leaders were ex-criminals, drug dealers, gangsters in their own countries, impoverished, unknown, and they seek fame. And believe it or not, there are also women who are in European countries volunteer to be sex slaves for them and go and wear all the kind of Islamic imposed clothes on them to be sex slaves, and they were many of them are returning to their own countries in Europe and Canada, and the United States refused some of them. In terms of the issue of ISIS in Iraq has been complicated by the sectarianism of Shia versus Sunnis. The Iranians and the Iranian militias considered every Sunni as an ISIS, which is absolutely not true. And I call it the ISISification of the Sunnis, in a way of a massive attempt by Iran to change Iraq formation and to abolish the Sunnis, to transfer the Sunnis in Iraq to refugees without a land, or land without people. And that's what has happening, and that's why justice has been lost with ISIS and any other terror organization. Not to mention, Iran uses ISIS in many instances to create mayhem and to impose their own will. And that's how they form the militias. They form the militias in an excuse that is in response with ISIS. And that's also, but Iran uses this pretext to accuse others, to accuse Israel, to accuse the United States of forming ISIS. But we know that the United States and Israel is no way have any interest in forming ISIS. And the only beneficiary of ISIS is Iran and their militias.
Entifad, thank you very much indeed. Entifad Kampbar there.